The following is a News 4 special presentation.
The top floors collapsed down.
It was a day of sorrow that left indelible images of horror forever seared into our minds and hearts.
Ground Zero is the scene of the worst attack against American civilians in the history of our country. More than 2,800 brave New Yorkers and Americans died that day. And it was a scene of incredible courage and the responders, incredible sacrifice, and we can never forget that.
It is the year of change as we secure our homeland and hometowns against an elusive terrorist threat.
If we can put together a reaction package so that people know what they're supposed to do,
Let's go.
even though an event might be catastrophic, that we'll be able to overcome it.
Rich Newberg reports. Day of Sorrow, Year of Change. With contributing reports by Lisa Flynn and George Rickert. A remembrance of the attack on America, how it has changed our lives and strengthened our resolve to meet the challenge of terrorism.
Good evening from New York City, where our world took a different turn 1 year ago today. We are still healing from this gaping wound, but in our recovery, we may have become a stronger nation. In Western New York, we are better prepared than ever to meet the challenge of terrorism, as you will see. But first, here at Ground Zero, we honor the dead and recall the heroism of those who responded. It can take a tragedy to bring out the best in a nation. Moments of silence for moments in time that changed America.
Robert Michael Colfers. Don Jerome Koth, Jr.
Names of mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers whose lives were snuffed out by terrorists filled with hatred.
Leonard M. Castellano.
Leonard Castriano of Williamsville. He worked on the 104th floor of the North Tower, and he never had a chance. His twin sister feels closer to her brother's spirit as she approaches Ground Zero.
I know Leonard's with us. I know he's with us, and he's a part of all of us. But I feel him with me. But I feel his presence.
Families here on this day communicate without speaking. When words are spoken, they are spoken with solemn conviction.
These dead shall not have died in vain.
A few words can speak volumes about the character of a nation. Preciously chosen words spoken during another time when the country was tested.
This nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
These words, as intended, are ringing out even beyond Ground Zero, into the streets of Manhattan and into the very heart of America.
People thought they knocked us down, and 30 seconds later we stood back up, stronger as ever.
Families find the strength to go on, and some are finally able to let go on this day of remembrance.
When I got down into the hole and I left that rose there for Margaret, I really let go. I really let go, and I'm going to try to separate 9/11, and my sister's memory.
Everyone here pulls together like they did a year ago. Paramedics from Buffalo are drawn back to Ground Zero to again be with their New York City brothers and sisters of mercy who had descended together into that pit of despair.
It really brings back a lot of memories of being here a year ago, but after time heals all wounds around here, and that's what everybody's going to need right now.
The thunderous collapse of the Twin Towers is now a memory here. Today, the World Trade Center site no longer bears the ugly scars of destruction. To many, this is sacred ground. In the days that followed the attack, shock and revulsion gave way to camaraderie and single-minded determination. A determination to find survivors and an unyielding pledge to recover remains.
I came here hoping to find him, but also hoping to find anybody.
Port Authority officer Dan Henry lost his 25-year-old brother Joseph in the collapse. Joe was a New York City firefighter. Officer Henry is now assigned to Ground Zero. His presence there provides a constant reminder of what he lost, and in a broader sense, how far we've come since 9/11.
On one hand, it seems like it was yesterday. On the other hand, so much has happened that, you know, it's tough. It's been a very rough year.
Heavy machines still operate at Ground Zero. Their work continues before thousands of spectators who gather at the pit's edge every day, trying to embrace the enormity of the loss.
I was back here in May, and I couldn't bring myself to come down here.
Many believe all Americans should bear witness to the attack, no matter how difficult the experience might be. Some have found the need to make the pilgrimage here more than once.
The loss of life, the destruction, the cruelty, you know, just the whole scope from the good of people to the bad of people.
Here, 6 stories below ground at the heart of Ground Zero, crews are now working to get the transportation system up and running again. Meantime, the city is weighing options of what to do with this site.
What to do is a delicate and controversial issue. The site constitutes some of the most valuable real estate in the world. It is also the final resting place for thousands. So to some, it is as sacred and hallowed as Pearl Harbor, Gettysburg, or Arlington.
Obviously, you're not going to forget what transpired here, but I think the more you see it being molded into structural buildings, and you're going to see it'll get easier. I think it's getting easier now.
Away from Ground Zero, coping has gotten easier for firefighters of Ladder 25. A year ago, this West Side firehouse was in stunned mourning. Ladder Company 25 lost 7 brave men on 9/11. Incredibly, the remains of all 7 were recovered. The last funeral for their lost brother was held just weeks ago.
We know we're fortunate because I think most of companies won't be able to do that. Even though it doesn't feel that way, it is a small consolation.
1 year later, in front of Ladder 25, the flowers, the candles, and mementos are all gone. In their place is a thank you letter to the neighborhood, a neighborhood that is functioning normally once again.
Community support was overwhelming for months following the attack. Firefighters told me in private, in order to bring closure, they needed time and space for personal grieving, away from the public eye, and the need to keep up appearances.
It actually faded a little bit, but it was necessary. It was a little, it was time to, as any unfortunate thing like this, a loss of a family member even, there's a time you have to move on a little bit.
There you go, I did our best.
Inside the firehouse, things now appear normal. It's part of the way firefighters cope, but below the surface, memories never fade.
We have pictures of our guys hanging up as soon as you walk into our quarters, and there's not a day you walk into quarters you don't think about it. Not a day.
9/11 has given firefighters who survived a sense of their own mortality. Some have now contemplated something they hadn't ever considered before the attack, getting out of the profession.
Seriously, I guess I started thinking about when I would leave, when that never really entered my mind until then. I said, well, maybe there is a point. So now guys are thinking, maybe I'll make that move earlier rather than later.
New York shouldered the 9/11 attack, perhaps as no other city could. A year later, the healing process has begun, but for those closest to the event, that process will never end.
Flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center towers.
At about 9 in the morning on that September 11th, Hamburg native Margaret Walyer-Seeliger was trapped on one of the highest floors of the trade towers. But instead of getting out, she made sure the rest of her staff at Aon Corporation got on the elevator.
You know, it's typical of Margaret. I mean, I think it doesn't surprise any of us that she would ensure that everyone was off the floor, people were on that elevator. She, in fact, was on the elevator and stepped off and gave up her spot. And then they realized that there were no more elevators coming.
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
And the Walyer family has relived it for the past 365 days.
It's the hardest thing of this whole, since September 11th, is seeing it daily in the newspaper and on the TV.
But as hard as it is to watch, members of this Lakeview family don't want the world to forget.
I think with the media keeping the focus on it keeps our government and government officials focused on it, which is ultimately a good thing.
Hopefully that, you know, as time goes on, that people don't forget, and that's one of the part of the reasons for the fundraiser.
The Walyers threw a fundraiser Labor Day weekend as part of their new focus, building the Margaret Walyer-Seeliger Scholarship.
I think it's the goal of my family members to make that the most desirable scholarship. Margaret was an impact person. I think we're looking for something that's going to be an impact type of scholarship that people in Frontier are going to strive to win.
And the first scholarship recipient just arrived at Elmira College. Frontier High School grad Elizabeth Workington.
It's a good feeling because I live up to her, try to do my best. And
Elizabeth plans to major in history here. Somewhere down the line, years from now, if she ever has to teach what role 9/11 played in history, she wonders what she might say.
I don't really know how I could teach it so they would really feel how it was during the time. But because I lived through it, I think it'll be easier and for me to explain it to them. And I mean, I kept all the papers and I taped things off TV and, you know, I mean, so stuff like that so they can really get into it. But
in Elizabeth, the Walyer family sees Margaret's academic, her volunteer, and leadership traits.
And so hopefully it gives her a little edge, or I don't know. Maybe it's Margaret's probably over her shoulder too.
It's just giving us something to dive into, maybe keep our minds occupied a little bit.
But their minds still drift back to finding some justice.
The focus of who did this and making sure, you know, they're brought to justice. And what I mean by justice is not a court of law. It's a different kind of justice. But
and to me, that's the most important thing. I know it's not going to change a whole lot if these two are captured or killed, but it would mean a lot to me, and I think it would mean a lot to the victims' families.
There's been a plane crash on the
collapse and all
just
the
witnessed some kind of...
We watched in horror the televised attack on our nation.
Yet another explosion.
The impact was overwhelming. It was the first time in the lives of the majority of people in our country that our legs were knocked right out from under us.
We gathered together in grief and sorrow, but with a newfound sense of what we stand for as a nation.
What I remember most about that night was the passion of the people there. I mean, huge numbers came out to express their sympathies to the people who lost their loved ones, but also to unite as a city and as a country, that we're Americans and we're going to stand together.
A year later, 97% of Americans remember exactly where they were and what they were doing the moment they learned about the attacks. 2/3 of those polled said the attacks had a great emotional impact on them, especially the 46% of New Yorkers who said they knew someone hurt or killed. But as we move a year away from the attacks, the personal impact has diminished considerably around the country, according to the poll, although people living in and around New York City and Washington are still affected emotionally. 4 out of 10 children still have nightmares and anxiety, according to another poll of parents nationwide. And many schools are encouraging students to express their feelings.
New York's like 7 hours away. It's right there. It was like
it was so strange because you would never think it could happen to our country, and it did. And
I think there are some genuine concerns for some kids about security issues, just in general.
But there are teenagers like these members of the Explorers whose commitment to public service was strengthened by 9/11.
It's fine. Okay, head person counts.
16-year-old Jessica Bonnell began training with the Maine Transit Volunteer Fire Department after the September attacks, although she had made an earlier commitment to volunteer. When she thinks about Ground Zero, pictures of firefighters come to mind.
It's like the whole image of people giving their lives to save others. It was heroic that they didn't think about themselves, but they wanted other people to get out safely.
Greg Havis, also an incoming trainee with the department, says he's willing to put his life on the line to save someone else.
Just because I wanted to help out, save lives, I'll do whatever I can to help the community give back.
Then there's Rich Chudy, who wants to someday be a firefighter in New York City, but wonders what he would have done if he had responded to the Twin Towers call.
Would I run for my life, or would I help that person down the stairs and get them out?
When you're approaching the car for a car fire, you want to control that bail on the nozzle.
Maine Transit Chief Jim Lewitta is proud of the young volunteers and says 9/11 has brought out the best in not only the teenagers, but also the regular active volunteer firefighters.
They train harder, they come around more, and their sense of dedication is fantastic. Actually, what we're seeing is hope for the future.
Whether it's the Delsky Federal Building or City Hall, Buffalonians have had to learn evacuation drills all over again.
It was a long honeymoon in this country from any kind of event like what we experienced here on September 11th, but it changed everything.
How vulnerable is Western New York in this post-9/11 era?
There's that unknown out there, and we're in an international city. We have a major border crossing, a major body of water, a major bridge, a major nuclear waste facility. We have a major power project.
State lawmakers are trying to beef up security to protect our water system, and each county in New York State has been ordered to make a list of its 20 potential targets.
We are a border crossing, so that certainly brings us higher on the list. The fact that we have the power project in Niagara County is a target. It was a target during the Cold War.
Over the next few weeks, U.S. Border Patrol will be installing day and night cameras to watch the lower Niagara River. That's in addition to the new boats and helicopter that Border Patrol agents now use. And at the border crossings,
we've always been out there looking for bad guys. If you ask any inspector working here today, they would say, without a doubt, that their #1 priority is looking for terrorists and weapons of mass destruction.
And to find them, U.S. Customs has a new truck X-ray machine that allows agents to scan the contents of an entire truck in a couple minutes.
It can pick up people. It could pick up an extraordinarily dense object.
But perhaps what drivers notice the most is the outbound inspections. One last chance for Customs to catch people or goods that shouldn't have been in the U.S.
Just since September 11th, with the outbound inspections, we've had over 40 arrests. We've seized over $2 million in unreported currency, and we've seized about $1 million in critical technology.
The Immigration and Naturalization Service has 50 new inspectors locally to make sure the people coming in are who they say they are.
Whether the nationality fits or not, we look at linkages such as where the people's money comes from, how they got the funding. So we always link back to, or try to link back to, any counterterrorism.
But in the process, members of our Arab and Muslim community feel they're being stereotyped.
I think there's a tremendous stereotype, you know, by your name, by the way you look.
And September 11 has been a double whammy for us. Not only as Americans, but on top of that, the fingers are being pointed to us.
Starting on this September 11th, some immigration law changes take effect when it comes to dealing with foreign nationals from certain countries. nationals from Iraq, Iran, Sudan, and Syria will have to report more often on where they're living and what they're doing in the United States.
My question is, is it going to be limited to those individual countries, or is it going to be generalized? For example, somebody comes from Yemen, names Muhammad Ahmed. Is he going to be asked the same question? Is he going to be fingerprinted?
But border agents say they can never be too careful or too cautious anymore.
Is the border vulnerable? I think that we're much better prepared today than we were 2 years ago, much better prepared today than we were 6 months ago.
Police officers and firefighters entering the burning towers couldn't talk to each other. And when a police helicopter pilot radioed that the second tower was about to collapse, the warning was never picked up by firefighters.
There's reports of police officers leaving the building because they knew it was time to leave, and passing firefighters who were on their way in.
About 3 months later, when Western New York rescue crews battled through 7 feet of snow, they often had to rely on cell phones because radio communication between agencies doesn't exist.
We can't talk to one another. You can't set up command and control frequencies. There's no way for the people to actually talk to one another on the scene.
228, you're in service Charlie, 1423.
This is about to change. In the wake of 9/11, Erie County is joining forces with the state in developing the nation's largest wireless government communication system for emergency responders.
Police and fire and EMS will be able to talk. And a larger scale incident, the emergency managers will be able to become involved. It's so important to be able to understand what somebody's saying, especially in a crisis when everybody's a little extra anxious.
There are many new steps being taken to protect those who would be the first to respond to a terrorist incident. Erie County Sheriff's deputies are not only receiving anti-terrorist training at a state-of-the-art new range, but also are part of a counter-terrorism network that sends out alerts to the state's 70,000 police officers.
Part of the goal of this network and getting information into the hands of the police officers is to combine or link all the different databases so that a police officer on the street, when he encounters somebody, not only can he check their driver's license to see if it's valid or to see if they're a wanted person, but can learn information, whether or not they might be a suspected terrorist.
We have to remember that those criminals who killed so many of our fellow New Yorkers on September 11th lived among us. They were here, and one of them was arrested the day before September 11th going 90 miles an hour, stopped by the Maryland police, and his crumpled up speeding ticket was found in the car he left at the airport.
Local firefighters are being advised to consider any incident a potential terrorist strike. They are attending national training centers, learning about weapons of mass destruction.
On the last day of field operations, they blow up a vehicle using somewhere between 400 and 1,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. And then you watch it from a distance in a bunker, and you get the feel for what this material can really do, and then how we can protect our responders and the civilian population if we do come across these types of materials.
Medical crews are now looking for indicators of criminal activity as they train to help victims at disaster scenes. They carry nerve agent antidote kits with auto-injectors that could save the lives of police officers and firefighters exposed during an attack.
We have to be concerned about the multiple casualty event or the catastrophe. 80,000 people involved, 100,000 people involved. And for that, we have to organize volunteers.
A new public safety campus, soon to be built on Buffalo's east side, will house police and emergency service agencies under one roof, with a new county Homeland Security Department tying it all together.
And is there a better way to do it in a way that creates a department like a Homeland Security Department for Western New York? We think the building of this new facility gives us a great chance to do that.
In this year of change, the first responders are taking nothing for granted as they put themselves in harm's way during these uncertain times.
not taking things for granted, not taking people for granted. You know, I think a lot of us have changed this past year.
I've grown to appreciate, what we have here in America.
It was a cataclysmic event that forever changed us as a nation. When America and our state was attacked, Western New Yorkers answered the call.
We knew that staying home just wasn't an option. A group of us felt we had to go there, and we had to go there now, so we got there as quick as we possibly could.
As New York reeled in the aftermath of 9/11, local firefighters and emergency workers packed their gear and headed straight for Ground Zero. They knew only that Americans had been slaughtered and hundreds of their brethren were missing in the carnage.
If there were an accident in Buffalo and if these people that are walking in front of me were trapped under a building, New York City would be one of the first people down there. We couldn't stay home. We had to come and do what we had to do. When everyone was stepping out of their cars and applauding, and that was quite dramatic.
The heartfelt appreciation of New Yorkers left a lasting impression on Buffalo firefighter Tony Liberator. He made friends manning the now familiar Bucket Brigade with thousands of fellow firefighters and volunteers. Now, Lieutenant Liberator returns to help train New York City firefighter recruits. Recruits desperately needed to fill the loss of 343 firefighters and a host of others who retired in the last year.
Prior to September 11th, we always felt that there was a great bubble over the United States and wars happened somewhere else. And I think, unfortunately, that bubble's been burst, and we realize that we are now as vulnerable as the rest of the world.
It was a nightmare, I guess, in many ways, so.
Erie County Emergency Services Chaplain Joe Bain joined the contingent of local volunteer firefighters who also answered the call. Emotions really hit home for him as he watched the funeral of New York Fire Chaplain Michael Judge, his counterpart and fellow Franciscan.
So I had to go away. I had to leave the room for a while and recoup, so it kind of started to hit. Having been in there many times and then to go and see that smoky rubble that looked like just a war zone, and I've never been in a war, only seen it on TV, it was, how do you describe it?
In the days that followed the attack, denomination did not matter as thousands staggered under the weight of uncontrollable grief.
I call it ministry of presence. Doesn't matter what church, synagogue, mosque you're in, you're there with people. No matter who you reached out to, a hand came back, and that's probably what changed me.
Unspeakable evil, paralyzing grief, and incredible destruction did not break the spirit of those who responded. Father Joe saw something special.
When I looked in their eyes and we hugged each other and I was able to pat on the back those dusty, dirty people coming out of Ground Zero, I saw the face of God. It's real. And talk about putting things in perspective. God is present in churches and in synagogues and mosques, and I saw the face of God in those people and in my brother and sister emergency workers, and that's God present to me in a gut, real way.
Some say it could be years or even decades until we fully grasp the impact of what happened on September 11th, 2001. We must always remember that day of sorrow and the terrible price we sometimes pay for our freedom. We must honor the dead, but also honor the principles for which we stand, for they are a constant source of strength in this year of change. I'm Rich Newberg. Good night.
I think 9/11 has shown all of us that, we're vulnerable. We have to live with it, we have to think about it, and we have to prepare.
The reaction was one, and it was unified. We will come through this. We will help the victims. We will help the families. We will heal this country, and we will be stronger.
Every now and then I'll be sitting at work or I'll be thinking about it, and you see images of the dust, the rubble that was left. It makes you think about how fragile life is.
I think the jury's still out on how people feel about it. Some never will get any kind of closure from it.
just a lot of fun, and you always knew she was around. She was just, she lighted up the room, you know, she was just great.
The challenge now is to keep that sense of unity, that common purpose, that belief in each other and what brings us together that has allowed us to move beyond September 11th.